Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone to our webinar, this time on integrating the sustainability topic into enterprise risk management with digital tools, which is a very intriguing topic in the sense that the double materiality assessment and sustainability processes overall share many similarities with enterprise risk management processes. And that's how we have ended up combining these disciplines and have found that it really makes sense, like strategic sense for organizations to combine these topics. About technicalities, we will be recording this webinar as always, and we'll be sharing the recording with everyone who has registered afterwards. Today we we have a very global audience, so good morning to Hasib, and good morning to all our other guests from North America, but I know that we have registrants also from Japan and Australia, so welcome and good afternoon, good night, or whatever the time is for each one of you. So it's exciting to have this global audience. Today presenting and as our guest, we will have Hasib Nasirullah, if I pronounce your last name correctly. So welcome. Good to have you. And then also presenting with Hasib is Miki, our CEO and co-founder from Inclus. Welcome, Miki.
Thank you.
And I myself, and I'm Irmeli Irvesalo. I'm heading up marketing here at Inclus. A couple of more technicalities before I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen. Feel free, like the audience, I know there's a lot of you, please feel free to send in questions through the Q&A section in the webinar, and we will try and address them as we go along. If it happens that we don't have time to address all questions, we will compile them into a separate document and we'll address them like afterwards and share the results or share the insights with you. But yeah, please feel free to send in questions there. It's always interesting to address them as we go along. But all right, without further ado, maybe gentlemen, you would like to introduce yourselves and start off with this interesting topic.
Sure, and from my part, it's great to have Hasib here as a guest. We have met a couple of times in New York and building our partnership together, but never had the possibility to properly ask about your background. And I'm always interested in people's motivation and their expertise that they bring into the table, and what is their angle to today's topic. So could you share a bit about your background? How did you end up working on sustainability?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey, and great to be here today. Thanks for having me for this really interesting topic. I think materiality assessments and risk management is such a key critical area for companies to focus on in the coming years, especially with regulation. So really excited to dive into that today. And on my background, sustainability is not a place I started my career. I think like many sustainability folks, my career is very varied, and the different things that I've done in the past have really been helpful in helping me get to where I am today, and also really in helping me in my current career as a sustainability consultant. I studied political science as an undergrad. I worked in financial services, worked in educational technology. I eventually ended up at graduate school where I did an MBA and had the opportunity to specialize in corporate social responsibility at that school. And my real way of getting into sustainability, honestly, was through the inspiration of a professor. I think we often all have that teacher or that educator that played a really critical component in our life. And for me, it was a professor of business and human rights at the University of Denver, Tricia Olson, who really exposed me to sustainability, not as sort of corporate philanthropy, companies doing nice things in their communities, but really as a real business driver and a place companies needed to focus in order for companies to be able to do better as businesses. And so that's really where I got my start in sustainability. And since I finished my graduate degree for 4 years now, I've been working with Sadali & Co. in the consulting space. And I, it's been a roller coaster of a ride, as I imagine many of you who are in sustainability on this call will agree. But the thing that keeps me here, I think, really is the purpose. And I think that's really important for me in career and work. And why I chose sustainability and continue to stay in sustainability is really driven by that meaning that I get out of my career. It's more than a career in some ways, it's a calling. I'm a big fan of Japanese culture. And so there's a philosophy in Japan called a framework called Ikigai. It's a way to find purpose and meaning. And I apply it to my career as well. And so when I think about sustainability, it really blends four things for me that are critical to having a meaningful and purposeful career. And those are, it's an area I'm passionate about. It's an area that, thanks to my varied experience and to my educational background, I'm good at what I do. It's an area where I think we can all agree the world needs a lot more of people working on sustainability and focusing on it. And it's an area in demand by companies. And the last, of course, it's a place I can make a career because I can get paid for it. And so blending those four elements together is what really makes sustainability for me the right place to be.
That's great to hear, and I think that most of us, all of us probably in the line, can agree that it's fantastic that we can get paid out of working on sustainability, truly, because looking 10 years back, it wasn't actually a profession or a discipline, so it's not been that far from today that we've been sort of having completely different kind of vocations in corporations, and it's great to have these opportunities personally as well. Great story. If we go to the sort of corporate world and working with clients, when you start working with a new client on sustainability efforts more widely, what are the essential issues, aspects you are looking at when you're engaging with a new client?
Yeah, I think one of the key critical things about sustainability really in the past 4 to 5 years is how mature and advanced the space has gotten. 5 years ago, there wasn't much sustainability data. There wasn't a lot of sustainability information out there. Only the largest companies were regularly reporting. There weren't as many rating agencies. There wasn't as many industry reports. And so I think at that time, there really was a sort of out of the box, one size fits all approach to how do you set up a sustainability strategy? How do you execute a sustainability program in a company? But now, because of how complex the sustainability landscape has really gotten, I think it really has to be a tailor-made approach for every company, dependent on their circumstances, dependent on their stakeholders, dependent on their business model. And so for me, anytime I work with a new company or a new client, regardless of whether they're new to sustainability or they've been doing their sustainability efforts for a very long time now, it all begins with an assessment phase. We have to ingest all the information that's out there, scanning the external landscape, taking a look internally at the company to understand what is the pressures the company's facing, where is the company today, and given that no company, not even the largest, most profitable companies, can focus on every sustainability risk and opportunity at once, how do we narrow that field down? How do we make sure they're not boiling the ocean, but they're really focusing on those small areas where they really have, the opportunity to drive impact very quickly? And so that part is so critical, I think, when starting to work on sustainability at a new company, that you really understand what's facing the company, so that you can direct your limited resources, limited time, in a way that will generate the most positive impact for the company and for the stakeholders.
Sure. And you've probably seen quite a lot of different kind of organizations in terms of the maturity level of sustainability efforts more widely and risk management. But what are the sort of key considerations if you just look at any organization, including the regulatory requirements on CSRD or any other sustainability reporting requirements, and then aligning those efforts with enterprise risk management? What are the key considerations there?
Yeah, I think it depends really on how advanced the company is. So we've been working with, so many companies on CSRD, double materiality assessments the past couple of years, and I think it's really important to kind of step back and take a look at, what is CSRD trying to do? So the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming out of Europe, which is subject to change right now. There are certain things that they're looking at, streamlining in it. But what it's trying to do is really make sure that businesses are disclosing transparently relevant sustainability information so that stakeholders can use that information to make decisions about the business. And so if you think about who those stakeholders could be investors who are choosing to whether to make an investment in the business or to keep their investment in the business. It could be customers who are choosing whether to buy the products and services for this business. It can be think tanks and policymakers and academics who are doing industry analyses, who are trying to understand whether companies are and industries are actually making progress in some of the areas that the society is demanding that they make progress. It can be rating agencies that are trying to collect this data so they can assess the performance of the company and then sell that rating onto an investor or a customer or someone else. And so when you think about all of those things, you really end up sort of, when you're looking at companies, there's sort of two approaches you can take. You can take an approach where you're really focused on what do these people care about, these different stakeholders, and how do I make sure I'm sharing the information with them that's relevant? And that's really one way to kind of look at materiality. But I think that sort of misses the larger picture, which is CSRD, yes, it's about disclosure, it's about transparency, but ultimately what it's trying to do is really help those stakeholders make decisions about companies that will drive, economic change, transformative economic change in Europe that will help make, Europe more easily able to meet its climate commitments under the Paris Agreement. And so I think if you think of it that way, it's really important that the materiality also reflects strategically what the company should be focused on. And I think that's where the link to enterprise risk management is so important, because enterprise risk management is a critical part for many companies of how they, operate their business, how they make sure that they're able to execute on their business strategy, how they ensure that they're able to take advantage and leverage their opportunities. And so if the sustainability double materiality assessment can be linked with the enterprise risk management, that's a really, interesting way to integrate the results of that DMA into the company's business model and strategy, which is ultimately what leads the company to actually make progress on transforming its business to be successful in, a different future. And so I think that key connection is really critical to help a company unlock the full value of the work it's doing. You could just do the double materiality assessment to identify, here are the 300 disclosure things that my investors and customers and other report users and stakeholders care about, and that's how I'm going to determine what I'm going to report on. But if you really integrate it with that ERM, you're now unlocking a lot of opportunity to use that data, use that insights to drive transformation across the business so that you can take advantage of some of the opportunities that are in front of you.
That's great comprehensive start for the discussion. What would you say that are the biggest pain points for corporations in integrating ERM and double materiality assessments, for example?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest pain points that I've seen as I've been working with companies, we always start out when we're doing a double materiality assessment, we ask about the company's enterprise risk management program. And we can get into a little bit later, what are some of the things that we try to do to connect the two. But we always do that because we see that there's value in connecting these two, not only from a regulatory standpoint, because both CSRD under the ESRS as well as IFRS S1 really ask companies to explain how their double materiality assessment or their financial materiality assessment is integrated into their overall enterprise risk management process. So there's a disclosure that has to happen around that has to be met. But we also see that there's a lot of opportunity in terms of getting internal buy-in by connecting these two. And so we always start by asking, do you have an enterprise risk management system? What kinds of criteria, scales are you using? Who are the stakeholders involved in that process? How often are you doing it? Does it already consider sustainability-oriented risks and opportunities? And we try to build off of whatever exists, or at least go in parallel. And the pain points that I've really been seeing a lot of, one is often that there's, especially in larger companies, there's a lot of silos. I've talked to clients before where they say, we don't have an enterprise risk management system. I've never heard of this before. I've never really heard of anyone doing this. And they have to ask around quite a bit before they find the right team that's responsible for this. And sometimes they're surprised when they do so, that they're like, oh, there is actually this whole risk management process going on that they weren't aware of, and that potentially they should have been included in before. And now here's an opportunity for us to break down those barriers, educate, cross-educate among the teams about what they're doing, why it's important, how it's connected, what are the common terms they can use so they're speaking the same language, and really drive some of that integration. So that's definitely a pain point, I think, some of those silos. And then the other pain point, I think, is that every department in a company tends to talk in its own language. Finance talks in the language of finance, and risk talks in the language of risk, and operations talks in the language of that industry and how they're creating and executing products. Sustainability has its own language. We have our own alphabet soup of all kinds of acronyms and things that we use that outside of sustainability people aren't quite familiar with. And often what I find, among my clients, the ones that are more successful, their role really on the sustainability team is to be a translator in their organization. It's to take some of this sustainability language and be able to repurpose it or reframe it in finance language, or in accounting language, or in risk language, or in their operational language. And so that's a huge pain point, because if I go to talk to someone and I use sustainability language, they're not going to know what I'm saying. They're not going to be able to engage with me in a useful manner. I have to really take it and turn it into the language that they're used to speaking, so that they can then understand really how the work that I'm doing works with their work. And so I think, particularly given the growth in regulatory requirements, we're seeing across companies, even the most advanced companies on sustainability, there is so much opportunity for breaking down silos and education internally, so that everyone's on the same page as to where the company is now and where it needs to go and what needs to happen in between.
How would you describe, is the sort of general speaking, the main pain point of corporations, the internal complexity and the stakeholder management, or is it about the external data, understanding the world, reporting, auditing? Which is it?
It's everything. I think every company is kind of different. I see sometimes with companies that it's dependent on the skills and complements, the skill sets that the sustainability team has, and how that complements the other skill sets that can exist within the organization. But I think the communication is a critical piece. The ability to set up processes. Sustainability 4 or 5 years ago did not have very robust, rigorous processes. So most companies didn't have to go through assurance. They weren't as worried about that kind of those kind of rigorous controls that exist in financial reporting, for instance. They didn't have to worry about audits quite as much. All of that is now coming to sustainability. It's a good thing. It's creating more credibility. It's ensuring better accuracy and confidence in the data and information that companies are going to be reporting out on and sharing. But it requires a lot of time to build not only the internal mindset and skill to be able to execute that way, but to just develop the processes and the muscle internally within and outside of the sustainability team to do it to that level of rigor. And so, I think particularly for companies that are in scope of CSRD, assurance and audit has been a really big pain point. Being able to meet the high standards of assurance providers is something that is definitely, I think, it's causing companies to spend a lot more time on each of the steps of their compliance program than they maybe originally anticipated.
Sure. If I reflect back on how did the sort of risk management and sustainability practices evolved, it was around 2019 or so when the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and COSO ERM started to introduce the ESG component into risk management sort of practices, policies, procedures to be incorporated better. And I think that then the main driver was actually investors. They were demanding better visibility and transparency on sustainability issues. And then we got the regulation sort of boom, and CSRD especially started to drive the sort of policy from policy direction, and bringing new methodologies and quite complex actually assessment frameworks also for the DMA, if you consider how sort of detailed it can be. It also challenges a bit the enterprise risk management practices of corporations, and perhaps gives a logical challenge on how do you then combine those both processes. The other one primarily derived from the business purposes of the decision making of the executive committee on general enterprise risk, and other one sort of assurance for regulation auditors and so on. But I think that everybody is still learning. Certainly the market is learning fast, and there's a lot of already lessons learned acquired, some mistakes perhaps made as well. But I think that more and more it's becoming more understood from both ends, from risk management and sustainability, that they have to talk to each other, they have to be linked. And at the end of the day, like you mentioned, the top management they just want to make better business decisions. And we should be able to answer that. How do you make better business decisions? They don't care about the exact policies or the procedures or, data and so on. They want to understand, what does the data tell us? What should we understand about the world? And I think that there's an immense possibility also when we combine these processes. And it's another thing how to support strategic decision making or strategy development with ERM or sustainability reporting. But then ERM is a framework where you should be following up on those activities, on those risks, with accountable people, rules, roles, responsibilities, and tasks and mitigation actions, and people actually putting those into action as well. And that should again link to the strategy implementation. So it's actually a shared goal how to raise and elevate the enterprise risk management position and importance in the corporation, and also the sustainability sort of agenda, because they both are talking partially about the same issues, and both are sort of perhaps sometimes arm wrestling on the position on the executive committee's agenda. So it's better to align those processes and provide integrated reports rather than something completely separate. So that's something that we've been finding out and getting quite a lot of feedback from our customers. One pain point is sort of ensuring that there's somebody on the top management that's committed, sort of angel of the whole process, or sort of adopter of the both approaches, how to actually find that sort of sponsor who's understanding ERM and sustainability. Have you found that as a challenge also, not only siloing in the business division level, but also on the top management level?
Yeah, I think there was something you said earlier that I really liked, which is, the pressure for this started with investors. And we have a saying that, regulation is often a lagging indicator of what the market has already wanted for a long time. And I think that's a critical thing to remember. Like, companies, are often focused on regulation because it carries legal risk, it carries compliance risk that needs to be mitigated. But it's also important to think about, right, strategically, there's benefits to doing a lot of this work, which is your investors are asking for it, your customers are asking for it, your employees are asking about it. There's people that are scrutinizing you in the media over it. And that's what really leads to the change. And regulators come in later when they see that there's enough people clamoring for the information that now they need to get involved to make sure it's standardized and comparable, and it's useful, and all of those things can be guaranteed. And so I think, it's really interesting. We see that too with a lot of companies. If you think about, as I've been working across these different companies, I'd almost group them into sort of three categories. of, some of them are perhaps, less mature on their enterprise risk management. And I tend to see this with companies that are, low risk, maybe in low regulation industries. They don't have very sophisticated ERM programs. They haven't been getting asked about it, right? Their investors aren't asking, their customers aren't asking, there's no requirements for them. And so they just kind of do the bare minimum to make sure that they're aware of things periodically that may affect their business. But they're really focused more on executing their strategy in other ways, and that there aren't as many risks maybe that they need to mitigate to execute their strategy. And often with those companies, when we're working with them, the DMA actually helps inform a lot of what they can do on enterprise risk management, and helps them set up a more sophisticated enterprise risk management system, because we're showing them a process through the DMA that can really maybe be useful as they start to encounter more risk in their business in general. The second group of companies, I would say medium risk, medium regulation. These are the ones that are, to your point, right? They're starting to get those questions from investors. They're starting to get maybe customers. Maybe they're trying to get an ISO certification. Maybe they, an auditor is asking them about how are you handling your risks. And so they're trying to put something in place, but they haven't quite figured out how to use it. And I really liked what you said about it doesn't stop with assessing the risks, right? What are you going to do about once you've identified the risks that are important to your company? What are you going to do about them, right? You have to put a risk response plan into place. You have to monitor them. You have to put mitigation actions in place and then track the effectiveness of those mitigation actions. And so I think that piece is usually missing for this bucket of companies. They assess the risks, they see what's there, they have some sort of system, some criteria, some scales, but they don't really take it that extra step of responding to their high risks and of really managing their high risks well, because they're really just doing this risk management piece as a kind of check the box exercise right now because someone's asked about it. And then the final bucket that we have that we often, there's a few companies I've worked with in this bucket, that these are the ones that are very advanced and mature when it comes to enterprise risk management. And sadly, the driving factor is usually there was some sort of trigger event, right? There was something that happened that the company should have predicted, but they failed to see, and it caused a major issue for the company. And so you see this in really high risk industries, really highly regulated industries, things like financial services, healthcare, extractives, mining, those sorts of things, that they tend to have much more sophisticated programs, usually driven by the fact that they've had to confront something in the past that they don't want to ever see happen again. And those ones, it's really interesting working with them because, to your point, you don't want to duplicate in a double materiality assessment things that already exist. So if the risk management process has already set up criteria and scales and identified key stakeholders, and it has categorizations, and there's already a team in charge of it and an executive in charge of it, and it reports out periodically to a specific committee on the board of directors, it really makes sense for the double materiality assessment to maybe some ways follow as much as possible those existing processes and kind of glom on top of it, so as to make sure that it's efficient for the organization and you're not duplicating efforts by assessing things twice, two different ways. And so that's what we try to do is we take, yes, we know from the CSRD under the ESRS, there's certain requirements for a DMA, and we take those, but there's still a lot of room for a company to develop their own process, and we try to take those and mesh it with the existing ERM for those companies so that they're doing this in a way that takes advantage of, the existing dynamic in the company, and it also translates it into language that everybody in the company already knows, right? And so it's very easy then for people to get on board and to get up to speed very quickly. To your question around, I think, the governance thing, I do find that, again, it depends on where the company is. Those advanced, mature companies, when it comes to enterprise risk management, they have entire teams dedicated to risk, right? There may be a chief risk officer. There's going to be someone on the board that has experience with risk management. There's going to be a committee that has risk management in its charter. The board's going to oversee the risk appetite statement and approve it. There's periodic updates to the full executive team as well as to the board on what are the key risks the company's facing. Has anything tripped a risk threshold? What are the plans they've put in place to mitigate the high risks? So those things already exist very, very strongly. And so it's very easy to kind of integrate the double materiality assessment into those processes. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when you have a company that does not have a very sophisticated risk management system because they haven't needed one historically, there isn't a person maybe that's in charge of risk. Maybe it's handled by someone else as their second job, right? While they have another day job, maybe someone in the financial reporting team or someone in the audit and the internal audit team. There isn't clear stakeholders that have been identified, right? There maybe isn't a clear documented process for how they're doing this regularly. Maybe they don't have anything embedded in the board on risk management, and it's more of a ad hoc. If something comes up, someone will take it to the board and talk to them about it, but there's no actual director that's been appointed to oversee that. There's no actual requirement that at periodic meetings it's discussed. And so in that case, we have to help the client figure out where's the right way to do that, because the double materiality assessment under CSRD, there's no requirement that the board has to approve it or that an executive team has to approve it, but there are disclosures under the ESRS that will require a company to share if and how it does involve its executive team and its administrative and supervisory committees in the process of identifying and overseeing its sustainability related risks and opportunities. And so I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity then to help identify, okay, who are the right people to be involved in the process. There's a lot of stakeholder mapping that has to happen, and to get the right stakeholders involved so that you have an effective output from the process.
Absolutely. And one thing that I like working with you is that you have a very sort of tailor-made approach to clients, and you want to right-size the efforts and the content and scope according to the client, and generally sort of help them as they need. And you said often that you take pride in not making the client reliant on you, but you just do such a good job that they will ask you to continue with the work, but you don't want to create any kind of sort of vendor lock or service provider lock to the client. And I think that's super important, that we can demonstrate to the client that we are genuinely understanding their processes and their resources and their context well. And we as a software provider, then we want to focus, of course, on the sort of global multi-year regular processes that we can then put in place so that there's the audit trail and the sort of continuity of the process, but you shouldn't compromise the other with the other. So do you have some thoughts on that, and maybe some advice gotten from your clients on how to match those two viewpoints, sort of being more tailor-made, and then on the other side creating sustainable and continuous processes on top of those?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point you bring up, which is and kind of to the point I was making before. It's like sustainability is so complex now; things out of the box don't work. So like companies really have to develop their own processes using what industries and what the industry is doing, what regulation is requiring as a starting point, but then really customize it to fit its own needs and the way that particular company works and the way that internally is going to be most effective and efficient. I think that's the critical piece, efficiency. And that's where I think like software going forward plays such a critical role. And one of the reasons why I like the Inclus platform a lot too is the fact that you can customize a lot of the templates and things. And I know you'll show this a little bit later, that a company can really make the process its own in the platform. It's not every company that subscribes to the platform has to use the same exact process, the same exact criteria, the same exact scales. Companies can really develop their own system within that platform. And I think what a platform really allows a company to do is to efficiently manage this year over year, right? So you mentioned the audit trail. I think that auditability is critical, considering that a lot of these things like the enterprise risk management, the double materiality assessment, are increasingly being looked at by assurance providers in one way or another. I think the scalability is important. One of the things we confront with a number of our clients is they're like, well, our business today is not going to be the business tomorrow, right? We may acquire new companies, we may merge with other companies, we may launch new product lines. We need something modular where it's like, if something in our business changes, we can go back and easily refresh and add on to our existing assessments, not throw the whole thing into the garbage and have to start all over again. And so I think that's a critical piece is what software really allows you to do is it allows you to create a process that's repeatable, but it also allows you to create a process that's scalable so that as the organization grows, you can continue to manage that ERM and that DMA together in a way that's still efficient and that's making the best use of the constrained resources and time that everyone has. And so I think that piece is critical. And what I always advise clients is when we're starting work with a client of like we have this requirement, you have to do your double materiality assessment, you're in scope of CSRD and maybe some other regulation, you're getting these requests from your investors or maybe your customers or whoever it is. When we have this, when that challenge comes to us, I actually like to start at the end, which is what is it that you actually need? What are you trying to do? Because if we can define that very clearly, what the output is, then we can develop, a tailor-made process that's not going to be over-engineered. Because that's the thing that I see the most right now, is that in this kind of environment where everyone's really nervous about legal risk and compliance risk because regulations involved, in this environment where there's lack of clarity because there's things constantly continuing to change, there's a tendency to over-engineer and overdo, right? If you don't understand what you actually need. So if you think I just need to develop a ERM materiality assessment process that will cover me for everything that could ever happen under the sun, you're going to end up doing so much more work than if you can clearly define, I need two things. I need to be able to create a report for CSRD. So I need to identify the things that I need to report on. And then I need to be able to go to my board and tell them these are the things that are key risks for our business so that the board will then approve us spending money on mitigating those risks. Those are the two things I want coming out of this. And if you can define that, then you can engineer a process. And this is what I really love to do with clients is then you can engineer a process that meets those two requirements in the most efficient way possible without having to cause too much headache for everybody involved.
Truly great
Hey
talk.
guys, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. I hate it because this is so interesting, but I'm just looking at the time. So we have 7, 8 minutes left of this reserved time, and I know, Miki, that you wanted to share maybe a little bit of how the combination of ERM and sustainability could, or double materiality assessment could look like in Inclus. So please go
Thanks.
ahead.
Thank you so much, Irkko, for keeping the time. It's important with me and Hasib because we have so much to talk about. I can do that fairly quickly, and then we come back to the sort of final takeaways and maybe tap into some of the opportunities coming out of this work. But if I share the screen and go to the sort of illustration on how exactly we can link enterprise risk management and double materiality assessment. So with Inclus, we typically have some sort of enterprise risk management impact and likelihood scales and maybe some other criteria as well. And so regardless whether we are using or have harmonized and same scales in the double materiality assessments, we can certainly sort of incorporate both into the same situational picture, even though they have been made with different frameworks. It's of course advisable that the financial impact scale, for example, would be the same in both processes, but we can, with some merging rules and sort of combining data from different processes within Inclus, create dashboards where we have any data available compiled with Inclus. So we can have double materiality assessments here and enterprise risk management in the same tool. And we can then have a look at what are the material issues on for example, different categories on the CSRD regulation or then enterprise risk management. And we can have a look at where from both sides. So we can first identify the material issues from the DMA, but then we can also do ERM or sort of, let's say, ESG focused ERM so that we can bind the ESRS topics also to the new risk that we are identifying. So we can have for example, the taxonomy of the regulation here directly in the system, and we can select what risks are talking about which topics, and then also bind them on the enterprise risk management to the sustainability analysis. We can also then, what's interesting here is methodologically speaking, that we want to engage a lot of stakeholders, of course, into both enterprise risk management and sustainability assessments, as there are so many sort of strategic issues that the knowledge is not laying in one business unit or one executive's mind, but rather you need the different functions and departments and divisions to actually think about the impacts on different parts of the organization. But then again, what is the overall result based on those assessments? We can use a bit of a Delphi method with the Inclus collecting those viewpoints and the rationale here, and then update what is the final score based on the stakeholder assessments, for example. So we can sort of adjust also then the assessments based on the stakeholder views, and use AI also to consolidate all the comments made about those different risks and opportunities into cohesive summaries, either risk by risk or then across all the IROs. For example, just asking the AI to summarize all of the comments of all of the stakeholders of all of the risks, and we can create different kind of summaries based on the prompts with the AI. Also, what we can do is when we're talking about the materiality sort of a threshold, it's often a matter of the risk appetite at the end of the day on which issues we want to have more appetite, and we can set the appetite also risk by risk or risk category into Inclus, and then we can see what is the sort of residual risk against the risk appetite, and then see what's the risk reduction need of different topics. So we don't want to necessarily take too much risk on antitrust or competition laws, but we might want to take more risk on innovation topics and have a more appetite on those. On the sort of scenario assessments, we have been incorporating also the risk management approach to different, for example, climate scenarios here, that we can identify first the risks and opportunities against each scenario, but then also do a cross-reference which risks are actually elevated in which scenario and how. We can also then have a look at how these different scenarios overlap between each other in terms of the severity of those risks that are inherent in those scenarios. For example, we have the low emission scenario here, 2.6, 8.5, and they might have same or partially different risks that are materialized in those scenarios, and then we can have a look at what are those issues and what's the sort of overall impact of that scenario if eventuating. But yeah, these are some examples on how to incorporate these processes in practical terms. There's so many considerations that I just want to illustrate that Inclus is actually a multi-criteria and growth impact analysis tool. So essentially, good consultants and savvy clients like ours, they often then formulate their own processes and tailor-made assessment frameworks that are fitting to their own analysis and reporting needs, rather than necessarily the sort of auditing only. And we often think of the process as either one time or then a project with start and an end. But of course, we are looking at the end of the day, the action planning side of things, and how do we ensure that we have all the mitigation actions in place, that we are then monitoring on what should be done and by whom and how. But yeah, let me finish here the short demo on the tool. But great, so we are closing to the end of our discussion, but if we sort of reflect quickly on the key takeaways, Hasib, do you want to reflect from your end, a couple of words?
Yeah, I think from my end, I think a key piece is that, regulation is really driving very fast needs for integrating ERM and sustainability materiality assessments, and making sure that the results of those DMAs are reflected in the ERM and vice versa. And so understanding what regulation your company's in scope of and what those requirements are and what those disclosures might be is a really important starting point. I think also, creating a single place to do these things and joining those processes together is a clear way to gain efficiencies within a company rather than having two teams doing two separate processes. Have two teams work on one process is a really clear win for everyone, and everyone can be speaking the same language too. And so find out what your ERM is doing, what kind of criteria it has, what kind of scales it's using, what are the definitions. Do you have a risk appetite set? How can that inform your materiality thresholds, like Mickey just talked about? I think those are clear ways to bring the two together very quickly. And that's going to vary from company to company depending on how mature your ERM and how mature your double materiality assessment process is. And then I think the other piece for me is really making sure that you're breaking down those barriers and involving the people within the company and getting alignment amongst key stakeholders. So the board at the executive level, by business division, across different business functions, do you have the right people engaged? And are you actually training them up using their language so they understand what you're actually asking them and they're giving you good information, good data? And then when you share out the results, they're actually able to use it, Mickey, to your point earlier, of making more informed business decisions, right? The purpose of all of this is that this data supports strategic decision making across the organization. So it's not enough to just ask people for their input, but you have to share back out that output, and hopefully they find it useful and they're using it to make better business decisions on the front line.
That's a great wrap up. Thank you so much, Hasib. I think that we have so much still to talk about that maybe we have to arrange another one, maybe in the fall. But please do contact Hasib. His contact details are here. If you just take your mobile and you can take the QR code from there, from the middle part. And if you want to see Inclus in action, you also can contact us directly from that link, or also sign up for our Risk Business newsletter as well. But certainly we would advise you to talk with Hasib as well, and with any possible challenges or opportunities you are also seeking from sustainability work and integrating risk management. So really great to have you as a guest, and we will be coming back with sort of short key takeaways also that Sodali prepared for you all. So you will be hearing from us after the session as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you also for my part, Hasib. Great to have you. And yeah, we will send you materials afterwards. Thanks also to the audience.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day, everybody.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.